Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session, or today's session on diversity in data. I'll be introducing our speaker today, Jenny Andrew, in a moment. Just got to share a few things about the event today and what we're doing this week. My name is Ed Evans. I'm the chair of the British Computer Society Data Management Specialist Group, which is quite a mouthful, but we're the team in the BCS that looks after or helps our members to access information about data and data processes and data practice, and that's our aim. We're supported in this. I'll just share a screen to show some background about the event and why we're here. So we're supported in this event by Dharma UK. Those people who are data professionals will be well aware of Dharma UK, or Dharma, the organization, and their, I never know whether there's a body of knowledge or book of knowledge, but the Dharma book is like a reference that we all use, and is continually updated. So we're delighted that Dharma are supporting us in this. In fact, Jenny's a member of the Dharma committee, and we're also supported by the BCS Women's Specialist Group as well. BCS is the Society for Chartered Institute for IT, and obviously the Women's Group is a very active and forward-thinking group within that, and we thank them for their support too. So what happened was we recognized the different areas in which diversity or lack of diversity impacts us, and we're interested in bringing people from diverse backgrounds into data roles. We want to show that data and the roles in data are not just technical roles. It's such an evolving field here that we kind of want to open the gates, I suppose, as wide as possible to attract talent into our industry. And diversity is one way to help us try and address that. We're looking to show that it's not just a question of technology. We're also looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how that is the data sets on which that is trained are so important in the outcomes that are generated from those products and tools. And it's very important that we try to be aware, we try to look for transparency within those tools, and try to understand the data that's been used, and try to understand and address any biases that might be in that data. So we have talks around all these dimensions, from recruitment, data analytics, looking and collecting and reporting, EDI, DEI, whichever way you look at it. Some of us refer to EDI. My organization, I work for the Open Data Institute, uses DEI, but it all means the same thing: diversity, equity, inclusion. Or well, in fact, the E can be interpreted too, but more of that later. And as data professionals at all levels, we want to try and provide inspiration, models of diversity, and diverse data have been proven to work. So then a couple of mechanics then about the session. So we're recording the session. The recording of the session will be made available by the BCS DMSG website. We do have more talks. I'm not going to go through all this, but we got another talk this afternoon looking at the graphical representation of data, which is going to be pretty interesting, and how you ensure that a wider range of understanding follows from the presentation of data. And as you can see, we've got a range of presentations, and all those are still bookable on the via the BCS DMSG website. So please ask questions through the Q&A. We'll be curating those questions, and we'll be forwarding those at the end to Jenny. So just to introduce Jenny then. So Jenny Andrew is a career trade unionist who applies her data skills in the pursuit of safe, fair, and respectful work. She herself is a late recognized autistic from a very neurodiverse family. She has a strong personal interest in campaigning for neuro-inclusive workplaces. And as I said before, Jenny is a member of the Dharma UK committee that helped us to put all this event together. So welcome, Jenny. And yeah, I'm just, without further ado, that's plenty of ado so far. I'll hand over to you, and if you can share your screen, and thanks very much. I'll speak to you at the end.
Thank you, Ed. And let me see if I can find the right thing to share, because I don't really want to show you my email inbox. How's that? Does that look like the right thing?
That looks good. I'm going to go on mute.
All right, let's go. Now I'm just going to follow up that introduction with a bit of a declaration of interest, because look, if you are looking for a calm and purely feel-good view of neurodiversity and data careers, then you've probably got the wrong person. So yeah, I am a trade unionist, so it's my business, and it's probably my nature to challenge cultures and systems that kind of fall short on fairness and equity and good work for all workers. But where we're talking about neurodiversity, it's personal. So I am myself autistic, and it's not just me. Like half my family, my friends, many of my most brilliant colleagues over the years are also neurodivergent. So while I have the platform and the privilege to raise my voice, I want to do that in solidarity and really for the benefit of the people who can. And I'd like to create a kind of slipstream where it's safer for my neurokin to raise their views and add their different lived experience. So please, use the questions and the comments freely, and you can do that anonymously or not, however you want to be heard. Now, I'm going to warn you, I don't have a lot of patience for empty words on inclusion, or the kind of hyperbolic flattery that we get about neurodivergence. And I'm not going to be shy about saying where we're getting this stuff wrong right now. So this is going to be a kind of call to arms for our professional community to create workplaces and careers that nurture neurodiversity in practical, respectful ways. And I'm going to tell you why, like in a profession that's built on novel, challenging outsider thinking, we would be kind of bonkers not to. So let me set out some of the terminology that I'm going to be using, and of course top of the list is neurodiversity itself. Now technically this is just the idea of natural diversity in brain structure and function and ways of thinking across the whole human population. Culturally and emotionally it's a bit more than that, because the idea of intrinsic neurodiversity is something that's benign and like actually useful in evolutionary terms. Like that idea that maybe being different doesn't mean we're disordered, like that's a big deal for people like me in understanding and advocating that we are complete and valid and not a problem to be cured. Now, neurodiversity encompasses variation across a whole range of cognitive functions and characteristics. So from things like sensory perception or language processing or focus and attention or left and right-handedness, right? And all of us, all humans, vary across those dimensions. Now that's shaped by our genetic predispositions. It's also shaped by our education and our life experiences. Hypothetically, if you were to take any group of people and score them on like 2 or 3 or 5 of those dimensions of neurodiversity, you're going to find that there's variation between individuals, and you're going to find clusters that follow similar patterns. It's important to recognize that there is a prevailing majority cluster, right? That's what we describe as neurotypical. It doesn't mean that they're average. It doesn't mean that they're all the same, but there is a dominant pattern there. And there are also outlying neurodivergent clusters. And those might be at the extremes of our dimensions of neurodiversity, or just somehow not following the normative pattern. So like if we take a simple example of left and right-handedness, right? Each of those is an extreme. Neither of them's better or worse than the other. But let's face it, right-handers are the normative majority. That's our default assumption. And because of that, our world is engineered for right-handedness in all kinds of ways that, like I, as a right-hander, I don't even notice. Whereas my left-handed brothers are constantly working around the disadvantages to them. So when I talk about neurotypical norms and neurodivergence, neither of those terms is pejorative. Like, it's just fact. And we have to have the language to talk about our differences, because not knowing about them or making out like they don't really matter has categorically not been working out for our neurodivergent minorities. Where the assumptions are entrenched, then the work to dismantle them has to be very conscious, very deliberate. I particularly want to reclaim the term and the whole idea of neurodivergence, because historically neurodivergent conditions have been described really solely by their deficits. And one of the power moves in neurodiversity advocacy is the act of neurodivergent people describing their own conditions, like in our own words. So I want to give you a couple of examples of that, and we're starting with dyslexia, which is one of the conditions that we've certainly known longest. Described here first solely by a few examples of its associated deficits. So issues with visually similar words, or erratic spelling, or really the whole process of organizing thoughts on paper. And I am not saying that those aren't real. Like, they are, but then so are the strengths, and here identified by dyslexic people's own experience. Things like problem solving, like narrative reasoning, like the ability to locate ideas in their big picture context. And when we balance up the challenges with the strengths, we get a more complete, a more nuanced, a less polarized, and frankly less dismal view of dyslexia. Right, let me go again, this time with ADHD. That's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that right there is some of the most negative language in neurodiversity. But there are strengths as well as trade-offs here too. So if you were to Google the symptoms of ADHD, you get things like lack of focus, poor impulse control, and carelessness. I mean, talk about judgmental language. Whereas if you Google the strengths of ADHD, you get things like creativity and connection making. And like, these are the people that come into their own in a crisis. Now, both dyslexia and ADHD in their ways remind me of another left-handedness parallel. So we actually know quite a lot about how handedness relates to the structure and function of the human brain, where left-handed and ambidextrous people have much more symmetrical brains, whereas right-handers on the whole are more likely to partition cognitive functions across hemispheres. So, for example, you might have language processing on one side and visual processing on the other. And there's a known advantage, like an efficiency to that kind of specialization. It reduces the lossiness of passing signals left to right. But the very fact that, the evolutionary persistence of left-handedness suggests that there is probably an advantage there too. And what they say is that aptitudes for creativity, for connection making, actually come from the cross-wiring. So it's the same characteristics, it's the same ways of thinking that are both enabling innovation and creating lapses in focus and short-term memory, right? This is a trade-off. That's how we need to think about it. because if we are seeking out brilliance in creative, like innovative, exploratory thinking, then we have to be willing to support those brilliant people in the things that they're not brilliant at. And I want to say this louder for the people at the back. If a workplace or an industry or a profession seeks out brilliance in skills and aptitudes that are consistent with neurodivergent conditions, then neurodivergent workers are what you're going to get. And you had better be prepared to expect them and respect them and to support them to be brilliant on their own neurodivergent terms. Now, does that apply to the data professions? Are we hiring on characteristics that are consistent with neurodivergent conditions? Like, you absolutely know we are. And let's be clear here that I'm not just talking about autism. And I'm not just talking about the very technical aspects of data work. I don't want us to double down on the kind of cliches that put limiting assumptions on what kinds of neurodivergence are good, or on what neurodivergent workers might be good for. So I did a quick desktop survey of the kind of generic aptitudes sought out for data disciplines. And I mapped them to the strengths that are frequently, not universally, but frequently reported by neurodivergent people about their respective conditions. Look, data roles and data teams are looking for a swathe of really disparate skills. And I'm sorry, but nobody's good at all of them. Now, what our neurodivergent colleagues offer is Premier League skills in some. Where we do tick those boxes, I'd like you to suspend your assumptions about what good looks like, because you could just be about to see something really special. Now, the ones where I put the question marks are interesting because these are very context dependent. Like, you might not think of motivation as an obvious ADHD strength, but when they hit on something that captures their imagination, captures their hyperfocus, it's off the scale. Or autism and team working, like, it's not clear in neuronormative environments, but autistic people working in neurodiverse teams are an absolute masterclass in open-handed, non-competitive, strengths-based collaboration. And communication, like the dyslexic who gets marked down for their written communication may actually excel in spoken communication. Or the autistic person who brings pithy clarity in written communication may have very patchy powers of speech. Like, we have spiky skill sets. Like, where we're good, we can be really good. And hands up, where we're not, we can be really crap. And if you want even competence across every skill, like, you're going to be giving up a lot of potentially extraordinary talent. The alternative is you hire people for their strengths and let the diversity on the team fill the gaps. Because a neurodiverse team collectively layering up, balancing up neurodivergent and neurotypical thinking, like, it hits every one of those skills. And that's how you build something better than just competence. Like, that's how you build excellence as a collective. And that really is the heart of the matter here, that excellence in our profession, it depends on diverse thinkers and each thinking differently about data. So let me do a quick summary up until this point, because I've mostly been talking about what we mean by neurodiversity. We've looked at a couple of neurodivergent conditions through the language of lived experience, which, yeah, it recognizes the challenges, but also the strengths. And I've looked here at how those strengths map to the needs of data roles and data teams. So let me say this plainly, that we, as a profession, our teams, our workplaces have to embrace neurodiversity. It's for the extraordinary talent, for the skills layering that collectively covers all the bases. And because we're here anyway, you hired us anyway. Now just give us the conditions to flourish. All right, this is just a moment of brain pause for me, because I'm about to switch perspectives, right? I've said a bit about what's in it for the profession or the employer, or frankly, the capitalist machine. Like, we are awesome. You should want us around. But what's in it for us? What do data careers potentially offer back to neurodivergent minorities? And I guess what comes next is diversity and inclusion as a data architect sees it, like with a vision, the Platonic ideal, and the current reality, and a plan to chip away at it, getting better and better and better. So my vision is here. What I know neuro-inclusive data careers can be, how great they should be, like with work that offers something for everyone. Whatever it is that drives you, we've got it, right? Work that respects our different journeys into and through our careers, and work where you're going to find your home with people who see you and understand you and value who and what you really are. But we do need to get real about where we are right now, like a warts and all view of the legacy systems and cultures that continue to limit and exclude neurodivergent people in our condition, or our profession. This vision, like this, isn't happening consistently enough, and we're not going to fix that by pretending that everything is universally lovely. So let's start by talking about human needs. And I'm taking you on a detour here because like what you're seeing here is a kind of disassembly of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a useful illustration of the harms of normative design. Now, I've got a few problems with Maslow's hierarchical model. Most relevant to start with is that he consciously cherry-picked subjects according to what he thought were healthy, right-thinking specimens of humankind. Right, so right out of the traps, he's manipulating his data set because the full extent of human diversity is going to mess up his model, right? And that's normativity by design. That's, to be honest, normativity to the point of eugenics, right? And both as a data professional who's been drilled in the scientific method, and as one of the people that the hierarchy of needs fails to represent, I'm not impressed by it. But the needs are real, right? We can all identify with these, and they're a great place to start a conversation about good work for neurodiverse people. What Maslow gets wrong is a generalization that these needs come in strict order, where you've got the basic needs as the foundation, and only when they're in place can you move on to the psychological needs, and only after that can you move on to self-actualization. And I can tell you that that doesn't work for me. Like it's almost the definition of autistic and ADHD hyperfocus, that like we can get absorbed, like, you know, eyes on that self-actualization to the exclusion of everything. Like we forget to eat, we tune out from pain, we detach from all sense of self-preservation. And actually the things that feed my need for self-actualization are a kind of retreat for me when my health or my sense of belonging are not so good. And I'm not saying that's great, I'm saying it's different. But if you see people in your workplace showing the hallmarks of self-actualization, and you assume that therefore their physiological and psychological needs must be sorted, then your flawed assumption is a risk that has to be recognized and managed. And we can't do that by kidding ourselves that we're all the same. So what motivates any worker in their job? More specifically, what motivates the neurodivergent worker? And quite pointedly, what might motivate them in one job, a data job, rather than another? Now, you know there's not going to be a simple single answer to this, right? For those who are heavily interest driven or values driven, like that, self-actualization is going to be a leading factor. And the form that takes is so personal. For many data professionals, it's the joy of the work itself. Like, it gives an outlet or a mandate to some of our natural ways of thinking that we don't really get anywhere else. So like, if you've got a head full of multi-dimensional jigsaws, or, you know, if you have a direct line of sight from the visual to the narrative, or, you know, if you get your kicks from funneling out from the here and now to the abstract future and then back again with insights, like, oh my God, we've got a use for that. For other people, the motivation is the subject matter, or it could be a cause, like the people that you serve or the real world problem that you're trying to solve. And because data is so hot, it's so pervasive, those of us with these incredibly versatile skill sets can shop around and take them wherever our hearts are. So personally, like, I've skipped from special interest to special interest. You know, it was oceanography first, now it's trade unions. And if anyone ever hears of an opening at the Kennel Club, like, I might not rule out another move. Just the other day, I was texting an Everton mad friend about an ad for a data analyst job with the club. You know, if you come with data skills, there is going to be something to inspire everyone. It's worth saying that this applies, or it certainly should apply, to routes into data careers too. So I had very little interest in data and computing until I had something interesting to apply it to. And it was good luck for me that my something interesting was in one of the most data native, like data intensive scientific disciplines there is. So not only did I have the interest and the subject matter knowledge, but also I had immediate support and the teaching and the data culture and infrastructure to really get ripped into it. But lots of neurodivergents are natural born researchers. And whether they're football nuts or teenage climate activists or a salesperson or a care worker who, you know, who looks at their work and has a shrewd idea that things could be done better, like, we as a profession should be looking for ways to meet them where they are, like take our data-driven methods to support their passions and their domain expertise, like, and in doing that, like, draw them into the data skills that open up interest-driven careers for them and a neurodiverse data workforce for us. Let me get down to the blue corner here, because while we're talking about pathways into and through data careers, it's a good time to talk about accessibility. And that's coupled to the physiological and safety needs of neurodivergent workers in particular. Like, every worker in every job has to balance up what it gives them, like in community and in financial security and those opportunities for self-actualization, against what it might take from them, which could be their physical and mental health. It could be the ability to meet their need for rest. It could be their self-esteem. And because work has been designed on the assumptions drawn from the neurotypical majority, very often the scales aren't balancing for neurodivergent workers. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, like, take as an example the official stats on autistic employment, right? Only 22% of autistic UK adults are employed, though many want to be. And autism is right at the top of the UK's disability pay gap, right? The 22% of autistic people who work, we earn 33% less. We earn just 2/3 of the workforce average. I hope that we are already talking about the accessibility of our workplaces, things like, you know, the design of communications, office environments, the layouts, the lighting, and of course, flexible working arrangements. Now, data jobs can lend themselves beautifully to those. And just sticking with autistic workers for the moment, like due to sensory overload in office environments and the strain of masking and burnout in social settings, flexible working can be the decider in whether we can work sustainably or as equal players in our workplaces. One of the pandemic-driven revelations for me is that like a generalized appreciation and investment in remote and asynchronous working, like, you know, no longer a grudging concession to workplace minorities, but something that everyone has a stake in. Now that's really validated. It's taken the negative assumptions off how we contribute, like those of us for whom this is a long-standing basic accessibility need. We also need to talk about the accessibility or lack of it faced by neurodivergent people on the way to data careers, right? Yesterday, Tristy Tanaka talked about the curvy path, right? And that's extreme for a lot of neurodivergents. Many of them have had time in and out of school, in and out of work, and related to that, they're that much more likely to have developed through like online courses or snaky career paths, rather than like this kind of school to university to profession path you might be used to. So this puts strengths-based hiring to the test. Like, are we judging the ability that's in front of us, or are we falling back on lazy assumptions about the right way, the normative way to get there? You know, for example, if your job descriptions specify degree or equivalent experience, that's great. But do your panels even know what equivalent experience looks like? Or is there still an unconscious preference for a Russell Group degree? And while we're talking about hiring, we also need to talk about the accessibility of the selection process itself. Like, do you reject applications or make assumptions about a candidate's other abilities based on spelling mistakes? Do you judge them on their handshake or eye contact or cultural fit, right? And actually, is your standard selection process actually testing the characteristics that are necessary for the job, or is it just defaulting to these tests of off-the-cuff spoken answers to unseen questions? Now look, those are long established shortcuts where we're using the characteristics that we can easily see as a proxy for the strengths that we actually need, right? But they are shortcuts that are based on assumptions or rules inferred from the neurotypical majority. They just don't work for neurodivergent people. To be honest, they probably don't work all that well for anyone else either. Finally, on these human needs, let's get to the orange corner, which is the psychological needs. Look, I said it before, it bears repeating, that if a workplace or an industry or a profession seeks out brilliance in skills and aptitudes that are consistent with neurodivergent conditions, and we do, then neurodivergent workers are what you're going to get, right? I have never felt love and belonging like it since I was in a workplace which was naturally neurodiverse, like a big diverse data team. And I could talk for days about the joy of that, of like hitting a flow state of cooperative parallel collaboration with other autistics, or you're riffing off ADHD and dyslexic colleagues, like each of us bringing like really clashing complementary perspectives and taking away something to work up according to our strengths. It's a lot of fun. It's also mostly more naturally accommodating of my quirks, like my terror of knowledge gaps and ambiguity, or my tendency to wander off into distracting theoretical tangents, or frankly, my lack of regard for established power dynamics. In a neurodiverse data workforce, they're not seen through neuronormative assumptions as pedantic or impractical or insubordinate. Like they may think I'm subversive, but they know I'm on their team. Now, even more significantly, in a data intensive scientific research environment where the whole practice and discipline has co-evolved with neurodiverse workforces, like my autistic traits are understood as real contributors to our data capabilities. Like they help make the data-driven culture that these days every organization wants to achieve. But look, I'm outside that data native world now. For the last few years, I've been in organizations with very different, very strong cultural norms and sensitivities of their own. I've had some pretty incredible support from people at all levels of seniority who, frankly, they seem to get a buzz off my differences, like who, you know, for whatever reason, they trust and respect me enough to understand that, yeah, I maybe challenge them in undiplomatic and unconventional ways, but I do it with the best of intent, and I do it to a good purpose. But there has been friction. Like I have burned bridges too. And I think we have to reflect on the very real culture clashes where data functions are emerging into non-data native organizations, like where we introduce pockets of neurodiversity with neurodiverse culture. And because we are agents of data culture, which is, like, as we all know, new and unintuitive and contentious to a lot of workplaces. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say you can't separate the two. Neurodiverse culture is, it always has been, the engine of the digital world. Neurodiverse culture is a kind of archetype of data culture. Like, honestly, we, like collectively, you know, the neurodiverse workforce, like we are the problem spotters and the problem solvers. We are detail and big picture, the micro to macro systems thinkers. Like we are creatives and entrepreneurs and storytellers. We're strategists and we are deep experts. But more than that, like neurodivergence, wherever we are, and I'm telling you from firsthand experience, even in our own families, we bring an outsider perspective. So neurodiverse culture is expecting and valuing dissent, right? It's a habit of looking at all the angles and calling out your findings. It's questioning everything. It's challenging absolutely anything, whether that's a 100-year-old tradition or the general secretary's dearest belief, right? And I'm going to be the first to admit it, that we can be really gratingly annoying. But you know what? Suck it up, because how a workplace responds to neurodiversity tells us about its readiness for a genuinely data-driven culture. Like we we see the organizations that want to put us behind glass walls and glass ceilings, right, to protect the business from our weird ways of working and thinking and communicating. But look, those weird ways are not just the price of a neurodiverse workforce. They're the fucking prize, right? You can't protect your workforce from the culture that you need them to adopt. Like, you're not going to benefit from our spicy thinking by trying to tame it or contain it. Like, you need as ourselves, like on our A game, like thinking differently about data. And if you have any sense, you'll pay attention to how we're doing it, because ultimately you need everyone else to be thinking differently about data too.
Thanks, Jenny. Inspiring. I learned an awful lot there. I particularly like the way every aspect of the description was positive, and you know, even from describing, you know, the positive aspects that are usually described in negative aspects, there's massive learning curve for me in particular. I like the example of right and left-handed, you know, because yeah, it's a really good example, because the society continues to thrive with both, and you need both. You need diversity. I really like the summary at the end as well, about because one of the questions I was going to ask was about whether data and IT was kind of a more suitable environment in general because of the range of roles, and you addressed that directly. And in fact, it may well be that the development of as you said, you know, the IT and data have progressed so much because of the diversity of roles that are applied to that. You know, you just have to look at the history of people who worked in NASA, who are working behind the scenes, writing all the code, to you know, the discovery of DNA, and the people behind the scenes who are doing all the kind of hard work when the blokes were down the pub. So yeah, I've got quite a few questions, and I want to sort of open it to the panel as well, open it to our guests as well. A lot of positive comments coming back from the people in the panel. I was interested then. You said you found an organization that kind of embraces that and embraces your strengths and is a good place to work. You described as a neurodiverse culture, if you like. I mean, what's your experience of organizations that are not neurodiverse, and perhaps, which is the norm, one presumes, but I mean, how might they address it?
Like, it is interesting that I think what I don't suppose you're going to go to any organization in the world that genuinely doesn't have some neurodiversity in it. The question is whether they see those differences in thinking, whether they see those differences in approach as a positive and welcome thing, or whether they try to trammel it in some way, right? And that's what I found striking about, like, in working in scientific research environments. You know, it is one of those places where, like, they've been hiring for years on kind of detail focus, like that deep interest. Like, what do you think you're gonna get? Like, you are gonna get a bunch of people like us, but not just that. You know, scientists who are kind of real butterfly brain creative, you know, just one thing after another, like, think about this, test that. You are going to get the autistic people, you're going to get the ADHD people, you're going to get the dyslexic. That's a natural thing. And it's I talk about this co-evolution of, you know, science and technology workplaces with neurodivergent cultures. It becomes like a kind of honey trap for us. Like they're giving us the work that suits our ways of thinking. And you get in there and you're working alongside other people who are happy to think in similar patterns with you. Now there's a break when you go into organizations that may have very strong hierarchies or like real kind of command and control cultures. It's very hard to break into those environments. Like, you know, anything that is like very sort of normative an environment. It could be, you know, it could be like dress codes and that kind of thing. Like automatically you're suppressing that difference in thinking, that invitation to challenge the, you know, the status quo. And I think that that's something, you know, like I say, that's not just the invitation to a neurodiverse culture. It's exactly the change that we're trying to achieve in organizations where, you know, we're all holding each other to account. Like, you know, does this stand up to the evidence? You know, and you may be the boss, but like this, we are getting past the highest paid person's opinion. Like there has to be an invitation for all of us to challenge. And maybe your neurodivergents are the ones that can exemplify that.
Yeah. I mean, we have a question that relates to that, the mindset change you would recommend for an organization if they were openly trying to address neurodiversity. I mean, a lot of organizations have DEI or EDI initiatives. I mean, what is the mindset change needed? Does neurodiversity get the same recognition as other characteristics?
It's so patchy. It's so patchy, isn't it? I think you know, that's one of the things that you know, there is an advantage in the mainstream tech and data workplaces, is they probably are more tuned into neurodiversity as one of the dimensions of diversity. But things are so patchy. Like you very often see it with any EDI, DEI initiative, that like there will be one dimension that comes into focus at any one time. Like this year we're talking about neurodiversity, next year we're going to be talking about you know, women in STEM, next year after that we're going to be talking about race. And you can't, you know, you can't distinguish those things totally. One of the things that my current employer has been doing a lot of work on is psychological safety. And I think that's an important concept for very much for neurodiversity, but actually for all dimensions of diversity as well, where, you know, there's a real sort of lifting the lid on what is it in our culture that like that enables people to be challenging, like, and to be comfortable with being challenged, and, you know, lifting the lid on the mechanisms that prevent people from speaking up and speaking differently. You know, that for me is a kind of a strong steer for organizations that think this is worth addressing.
Yeah, I like what you said about the digital transformation as well. But rather than my questions, I'm going to go to the questions here from the audience. And so the question about the educational routes into careers and where that starts really. And the question is really about how schools. I mean, do you have an opinion on how schools or employers might offer better advice to children in career choices and
I mean, like, without wishing to get too hardcore political about this, I have very strong views on like the resources that are given to neurodiversity in schools in particular. And, you know, bearing in mind that, like, as I say, I have a very neurodiverse family. I have young relatives who are have been suffering the raw end of this right now, and there is no getting away from the fact that special education needs, like in schools, need better resourcing. They need better supplies so that you know, whatever those different needs are that kids have, there is the scope for them. There's a place for them to go. There is an environment where they can be and they can keep learning. And to be honest, I don't care what they're learning, as long as they have a place where they can be learning. Now, that I don't care what the learning thing kind of goes back to the point about like these interest driven routes into data, that, you know, there is something, I think, I don't know quite what it is, but I'm sure there is something that we, as, you know, professional associations working in the space, could be assembling to help educators give frameworks for kids to slot in their own interests, right? Here is my, you know, here is a set of tools, here is a set of methodologies, like here are some places I can go and look for data on the things that I'm interested in, and start messing about with them. I mean, genuinely, we all know it. We all know about the the tech nerds who like get lost, you know, in their computers for their entire teenage years, like, you know, just really kind of interest focused. It doesn't have to come from the tech space. Whatever it is, we should be offering the frameworks for them to fit that interest into it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? The first time you hear about kind of diverse teams and diverse teams work better is always in the workplace, and not necessarily, well, it wasn't in school, at school, which is admittedly quite a long time ago. But there's a question about an organization embracing the patchy skills or the diverse skills. I mean, how much can be planned and how much is about throwing everybody up and seeing where they land? You know, that people will gravitate to the kind of jobs that they are good at or thrive in, and how much of it could be planned? Have you seen both approaches or attempts at both approaches?
Boy, like I think that's a really good question. I mean, I do think that there's, you know, there's a kind of short-term planning that can go around that, you know, where you look at the team that you've got and you say, what are the gaps, you know, rather than sort of be completely wedded to, here is an absolutely bog standard job description for, you know, this is the job description for a data engineer. This is the job description for a data scientist. Like, this is the progression route through the organization into management, rather than saying, right, it's all the same, it's all the same. You look at the team that you've got in front of you and you say, what do we think might help balance this up? Like, you know, have real, open, constructive, positive conversations about strengths, rather than making like that, you know, those kind of assessments of organizational capability. Oh, well, you're not doing so well in X, Y, or Z, where you get the honesty from the team and they say, actually, you know, we could do with somebody who is better than us at project management, or like, you know, presenting to the board, or whatever it happens to be. And you hire on strengths, you hire on skills. Like, you don't say generic, like, this is what we think homogeneous good looks like. That's gonna help. But I think what we very often get is it's that hiring in one's own likeness, where we all do it. We tend to look at the things that we think we're clever about right? And if somebody else is clever about them, you think, oh yeah, like that's a really clever person, rather than looking at the people who do something that we absolutely can't and go, wow, like you are the person that I want to work with.
I've got one more question from the audience here, and then perhaps I'll just ask you if there's anything that you wanted to say that you didn't say, but give you a chance to summarize if you like. But the question about...
can I say the thing that I didn't want to say that I did say? Apologies for the swearing. There it happened.
Okay. There's a question about neurodiversity and genders and colours differently, and how the intersection of those things, because that's where I guess EDIDI, gets even more complicated, the intersection of those things. Is there any evidence or...
Oh boy, like, is there? I mean, you still see...
you could take offline with the question.
Yeah, no, it's huge, and it's a really important one to address, because still one of the challenges that we find in, particularly late diagnosed autism, late diagnosed ADHD, is an under recognition of what an autistic person, what an ADHD person looks like, and huge gender normativity in that, huge racial normativity in that, right? My male cousins, my male nephews, like, we're always going to be the ones who got diagnosed like in childhood with autism, whereas people think, oh well, like, it's only 1 in 4 autistic people are are female, therefore it's less likely that it's going to be you, and that sets up the the prejudices about who gets diagnosed. It also starts to set up layered prejudices about what people will tolerate from from my autistic behaviors. We hear about Black autistic people or Black ADHD people who their behaviors are more likely to be perceived as aggressive. It's like, no, they're just autistic. They just have ADHD. That's what it is. And yet it's all banked up with those wider perceptions that we have. A million things to consider in that.
Well, listen, Jenny, I love the positive messages in everything you've said today. And is there anything else you'd like to add or to finish us off here?
No, I think when I stop, I just stop.
No, but it was a very clear and honest expression of where things are up to, and your journey, your experience in that's been really helpful, and really quite a lot of food for thought for people who in any data role, any leadership role, but even people with children who are going through this at school, where the destination is a diverse workforce, is a very positive story, isn't it? So yeah. So anyway, thanks very much for that, Jenny, and thanks everybody for listening to us today. And we're back on at 4 o'clock with more interesting talks about diversity and data. So thank you.